At times, he heard within him a soft, gentle voice, which reminded him quietly, complained quietly, so that he could hardly hear it. Then he suddenly saw clearly that he was leading a strange life, that he was doing many things that were only a game, that he was quite cheerful and sometimes experienced pleasure, but that real life was flowing past him and did not touch him. Like a player who plays with his ball, he played with his business, with the people around him, watched them, derived amusement from them. But with his heart, with his real nature, he was not there. His real self wandered elsewhere, far away, wandered on invisibly, and had nothing to do with his life. He was sometimes afraid of these thoughts, and wished that he could also share their childish daily affairs with intensity, truly to take part in them, to enjoy and live their lives, instead of only being there as an onlooker. Hey, this is Nathan.
This is David. Welcome to another episode of the Books of Some Substance podcast. On this episode, we're talking about Siddartha by Hermann Hesse, and Nathan is going to try to summarize this book real quick.
This is my skill set.
Yes.
So, Siddhartha, not Siddhartha, apparently. Both David and I have been mispronouncing this book our entire lives.
Yes, since birth.
Since we arrived from the womb, clutching this book in our hands, each of our separate hands. So Siddartha is a novel written by Hermann Hesse in 1922, and it tells the story of kind of the progression of this young man's life. He is born in this village in India. I don't like telling it this way.
I think Siddartha would argue with the idea that this is a progression.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because, there is no time.
But
he was always the Brahmin. He was always the rich man. He was always the ferry boat.
Ferryman?
Ferryman? Okay.
Ferry boat driver?
I don't know. I can't remember. But yeah.
So
you feel like you can't do this?
No, let me do this. No, I just, telling it as a summary versus like this. I don't know. Just I got into this rut. Okay, time is non-linear. However, books are linear. So how would I describe this book? It's pretty straightforward. It's a story of Siddhartha's life. It starts with him as a young man. Siddhartha. A story of Siddhartha's life. Him as a young man, and he pursues a life of asceticism and abandons his family and what they want for him. He leaves with his friend Govinda, and while they are practicing ascetics, they meet the Buddha. Gautama? He meets Gautama, and Govinda decides to follow this teacher, and Siddhartha continues his wandering path in search of a more individual truth. This leads him to a village where he abandons asceticism and starts to pursue a life of lust and greed, wealth, kind of as a game. He sees it as he's using the skills he acquired as an ascetic to play this game of material wealth. He does this for a while, falls in love with this woman, Calw, and eventually has a child, but grows disillusioned with this and moves on, kind of lost, realizing that he's lost his way. He's now kind of a middle-aged man and wanders out into the forest, not sure where he's going or what he's doing, but he has abandoned everything. And comes upon this ferryman in his hut who he had met on his way into the village, and sees in this ferryman maybe another way of life. And so the ferryman teaches him how to be a ferryman, and he stays in this hut and listens to the river and learns from the ferryman, and eventually attains a state of enlightenment. Well, I guess before he attains a state of enlightenment, his son returns to him. His son returns with Calw, and Calw dies. His son stays with him for a while, but is very unhappy, and he eventually his son runs away, and he has to let him go, and he experiences like true sorrow for the first time. And he eventually has to work through that and listen to the river and come to a state of peace with himself. And that's basically it. That's the plot.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a few stages. There's him with the ascetics. There's the brief moment of meeting the illustrious Buddha. There's the living a sort of ordinary life. And then there's the final, I guess, 2 stages. There's the kind of like living as, I can't remember his name exactly. I think it's Vasudeva, the ferryman.
Vasudeva?
Vasudeva?
I think it's
Vasudeva. Yeah. Vasudeva, the ferryman. And then there's him sort of becoming totally content after he accepts, I guess, the world for what it is in a certain way. Yeah, and each one, there's a sort of learning process and an abandonment of what he did before in order to kind of pursue what he thinks comes next. And then that sort of total acceptance is the weird one at the end, which is very hard to define. And I think even Hesse has a hard time defining it. Like when he's trying to explain it through Siddhartha to his friend Govinda at the end of the book, he kind of talks about how words are half-truths and that true wisdom can never be taught. It can only be experienced.
Do you want to read that quote real quick?
I mean, there's a few of them at the end that kind of go into that. There's the one about language itself. Let me find it. I'm taking like 3 pieces from this larger section. So, wisdom is not communicable. The wisdom which a wise man tries to communicate always sounds foolish. Later, he says, knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. One can find it, live it, be fortified by it, do wonders through it, but one cannot communicate and teach it. And then again later, talking about language. And this is all in this sort of long conversation he has with Govinda. He says, a truth can only be expressed and enveloped in words if it is one-sided. Everything that is thought and expressed in words is one-sided. Only half the truth. It all lacks totality, completeness, unity. When the illustrious Buddha taught about the world, he had to divide it into samsara and nirvana, into illusion and truth, into suffering and salvation. One cannot do otherwise. There is no other method for those who teach. But the world itself, being in and around us, is never one-sided. Never is a man or a deed wholly samsara or wholly nirvana. Never is a man wholly a saint or a sinner. This only seems so because we suffer the illusion that time is something real. Time is not real, Govinda. I have realized this repeatedly. And if time is not real, then the dividing line that seems to lie between this world and eternity, between suffering and bliss, between good and evil, is also an illusion. And then, just one more little thing. The world, Govinda, is not imperfect or slowly evolving along a long path to perfection. No, it is perfect at every moment. Every sin already carries grace within it. All small children are potential old men. All sucklings have death within them. All dying people, eternal life. And again, it's not fully communicated in those lines, but you get a hint at what he's trying to express. And Govinda doesn't really understand it until this weird sort of magical moment at the end of the book where he kisses Siddhartha's forehead and then has the third eye open revelation thing, which is weird and I don't fully get.
My impression was that he, at that moment, not necessarily that the enlightenment passed to him, but in that moment, he understood and accepted that Siddartha had kind of reached that state. And I think that revelation was important because, halfway through the book, so Govinda and Siddartha are following a similar path. Govinda is actually following Siddartha into this asceticism and trying to understand the truth of existence. And then they part ways when they meet the Buddha. And, on the one hand, you could look at that and say, well, Govinda is doing the righteous thing. He committed his life and lived his life following this teacher, this enlightened, wise person. And Siddartha follows himself.
Yeah, he follows that voice that you mentioned in the beginning, which is this sort of thing that it's like the through line of a lot of his actions is that voice inside of him that pulls him in different directions. And there's that one line, and this is, I think, earlier on in the book, but it says, to obey no other external command, only the voice, to be prepared, that was good, that was necessary. Nothing else was necessary. It's that voice that sort of pushes him and keeps him from attaching himself at least for any long period of time, to any way of living or school of thought.
Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, he was open when he found Vasudeva and the river specifically, that he was still open enough to be able to listen to the river, which maybe you could say that was the language that touched his soul and was able to communicate to him this truth, where, maybe for Gautama that was the Bodhi tree or whatever. But I think the message of this book is that there's not one way to find that. It's a matter of being true to yourself and following that voice and listening for what it has to say, that will eventually, through a circuitous route, lead you to it.
Yeah, and I know Hesse was a big fan of Nietzsche, and there's that kind of famous line from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I can't remember exactly but it's something like, don't follow me, follow yourself. Don't listen to me, listen to yourself, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think that seems to be a big part of this book's message, if there is one. But it's that, like, even Govinda at the end feels not completely unsatisfied, but not wholly satisfied with his life. Even though he dedicated most of his life to this teaching and these ideas, he never felt, I don't want to say peace, but I don't know. For the most part, the book is like this third-person narrator. It's told in a way that feels very classic, like an old legend or an old fairy tale, the way, the style of writing, which is a little weird at first. Like, it's not the most well-written book. It feels very old-fashioned in a way.
It feels like a fable.
Yes, it really does. It really, really does. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of clear description of what a person is feeling or thinking in that moment. There's not a lot of, like, hidden literary techniques or anything going on. It's very straightforward.
And it's funny. So this is the second time I've read this book. I read it maybe, 13 years ago, some while ago now.
For me, it's more than 20 years. I read this in high school.
Oh, wow.
This was the first Hesse book I ever read, and I even took part of the book for a band name I was in.
Oh, really? What was the band name?
They were called Breaking Samsara.
Nice.
Yeah. Terrible band name. But, high school, hardcore, what are you going to do?
But I think, so I read Steppenwolf before I read this, and I love Steppenwolf. And then I read this, and I think I had that feeling that you're talking about. Like, it was just a little bit too simple, a little bit too straightforward and earnest. And I kind of thought, I don't know, I didn't think it made much of an impression on me, to be honest. Steppenwolf really had. So reading it now, at this point in my life, I think maybe ironically, because I know that for a lot of people, it's one of those books that you read in high school or college and has an impact and kind of, helps in your development. I didn't feel like it did that.
No, I'm with you on that one.
I kind of thought, well, this is a little bit too basic. But now reading it, I'm like, nah, there's a lot of wisdom. There's so much that's right about this. And I've lived half of this book now.
Man,
and I can see that.
The point in his life where he's like fed up with his ordinary world feels very midlife crisis-y, which is right in our wheelhouse of like near 40s, I guess. But it hit harder this time, that's for sure. Yeah, as a teenager, I don't know, it didn't, like you said, I know people had very profound experiences with this book when they were younger. But it made no real lasting impression on me. Like, I misremembered a lot of this book when I went and read it again 20 or so years later. So many things happened. And like you said, a lot of like these truths or wisdoms that are in the book, I don't remember them being there.
We talk about, well, Nick's not here. I feel like Nick always brings this idea up. Like the noise level, like, you raise the bass level noise, and then you hear a different kind of melody through the noise. And it's like in this book, there's no noise. It's all melody. And I think style can be noise, right? Like you add in all this other stuff. You add in things that don't have to do with whatever that the underlying worldview or moral or messages in the book. And I think as a teenager or, early 20s, I wasn't maybe open enough or receptive enough for somebody to simply say a simple truth. It needed to be layered in, a thick mire of style and...
Yeah. And man, I go back and forth on this idea a lot, even today. Part of me loves that kind of stuff. And I mean, even Hesse loves it. Look, I mean, the last book he wrote, The Glass Bead Game, is
Glass
just
Bead
this.
Game, yeah.
I mean, granted, it doesn't have a lot of the noise present in the text, in the words and the writing. Like, it's not overly florid or complex or anything like that. It's still somewhat simply told, but the ideas are so bizarre and hidden and elusive. And it's so long and somewhat complicated and very vague. It's an incredibly vague book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when people ask me, what the hell's the Glass Bead Game? I'm like, I have no idea. But yeah, this...
I think about that sometimes, like I experience something like, oh, maybe that's the Glass Bead Game.
Yeah. This feels very different than that. And maybe because we just got done reading War and Peace, which was this very long novel, not overly complex in its language, but its form is rather unique. And it is about, like, that last quote that I read about how there is no progression. This is sort of the opposite of that. Or at least War and Peace was all about, like, history is this progressive thing. There's this goal that it's moving towards, and you are just this part of it. And this book feels, or at least Siddhartha's realization seems to be somewhat opposing that idea.
Although, I don't know. I would say, I think, again, we're talking about language, and the language seems oppositional. But I think the concept may come around to being quite similar, because in Tolstoy's view, there is an inevitability of history.
That's true.
And you could say it inevitably moves from, in a linear progression. But if it's inevitable, you could also say it's already there, which is what Hesse is saying, that time is like the river, and the mouth of the river.
Yeah, he goes into this thing about how all parts from the evaporation into the clouds to the rain droplets to the bends to the mouth, these are all the river. It's all one thing. I can't remember that. I don't know if you highlighted that quote, but I thought it was really cool. Oh man, I think it's... But it was essentially like all parts are the river itself. So it says, he once asked him, have you also learned that secret from the river, that there is no such thing as time? A bright smile spread over Vasudeva's face. Yes, Siddartha, he said. Is this what you mean, that the river is everywhere at the same time? At the source and at the mouth, at the waterfall, at the ferry, at the current, in the ocean, and in the mountains, everywhere. And that the present only exists for it, not the shadow of the past, nor the shadow of the future. That is it, said Siddartha. And when I learned that, I reviewed my life, and it was also a river. And Siddartha the boy, Siddartha the mature man, Siddartha the old man were only separated by shadows, not through reality. Siddartha's previous lives were also not in the past, and his death and his return to Brahma are not in the future. Nothing was, nothing will be, everything has reality and presence. So, is there a way, I'm curious, if you could, I don't know if you want to get personal, but what exactly did this book reveal to you? You said it revealed simple truths. What's one of them?
It's funny because I think that I feel like it must have influenced my life, because reading some of these things, I'm like, oh yeah, that's something that I felt like I had learned. There's just so many things. This, nobody finds salvation through teachings. This idea of, you can learn things, but it's not going to save you. You have to go out and live. There's one. How deaf and stupid I've been, he thought, walking on quickly. When anyone reads anything which he wishes to study, he does not despise the letters and punctuation marks, and call them illusion, chance, and worthless shells. But he reads them, he studies and loves them, letter by letter. But I, who wish to read the book of the world, and the book of my own nature, did presume to despise the letters and signs. I called the world of appearances illusion. I called my eyes and tongue chance. Now it is over, I have awakened. I have indeed awakened, and have only been born today. And the idea of, like, he had, by entering into this asceticism, already made these assumptions that he wasn't going to read, the rest of the book. He already knew what the book was and was going to live like that. And so that idea of like, well, to learn anything, you've got to study as much of it as you can. You have to read as much of the book as you can.
Mm. Yeah. Early on in the book, you see him, he looks at people in the world with contempt, I think is how it's described. He sees all these people, and he kind of goes through this list, and to them, it's all illusion, all happiness, all beauty. It's all just Maya. And he thinks he's above that and better than them, but he never really understood it or lived it. And so, he decides he must actually live somewhat in order to, I guess, move beyond it. But he never, his moving beyond it is not, he never goes back to feelings of contempt. It's all love, man. But like he does, like it becomes a kind of beautiful acceptance of things, which I appreciate.
And there's a great passage when he's a ferryman where he's kind of reflecting on that.
Also, the way you say ferryman sounds weird to me. I feel like it should be ferryman. Ferryman.
Ferryman? Yeah, what do I say, ferryman?
You really enunciate the two words separately. I don't know why.
It's my Texas accent, I guess.
They do it in Texas like that? Okay.
That's my line.
Sure.
He says, he now regarded people in a different light than he had previously. Not very clever, not very proud, and therefore all the more warm, curious, and sympathetic. When he now took the usual kind of travelers across, businessmen, soldiers, and women, they no longer seemed alien to him as they once had. He did not understand or share their thoughts and views, but he shared with them life's urges and desires. Although he had reached a high stage of self-discipline and bore his last wound well, he now felt as if these ordinary people were his brothers. Their vanities, desires, and trivialities no longer seemed absurd to him. They had become understandable, lovable, and even worthy of respect. There was the blind love of a mother for her child, the blind foolish pride of a fond father for his only son, the blind eager strivings of a young vain woman for ornament and the admiration of men. All these little simple, foolish, but tremendously strong, vital, passionate urges and desires no longer seemed trivial to Siddartha. For their sake, he saw people live and do great things, travel, conduct wars, suffer and endure immensely, and he loved them for it. He saw life, vitality, the indestructible and Brahman in all their desires and needs. I want to say that I'm there yet, but I think I have a lot more sympathy for that perspective than I did when I was 22.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people, or at least maybe it's just myself and some of the people I know, but I feel like when you're younger, especially in your 20s, you have this contempt for the world that you think you're above these things, and so you look down on a lot of the world. But I think as you grow older and experience it, hopefully you learn to appreciate and sympathize and understand more of it, especially if you go out into it and experience it, travel, see different ways of being.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also really enjoy about this book now is that it presents these stages of this man's life without judgment. I think you could say that the stage he achieves later in life as the ferryman by the river is superior, that he has a better understanding of things, but that it was his previous experiences, the river of his life led him to that point. And that to have cut that off shorter to accepted teachings, to have even, I think, to judge oneself by someone else's definitions, by a religious teacher, for instance, cuts that journey short, which would have prevented him from actually reaching the river.
Yeah, and again, going back to Nietzschean ideas of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, this idea that all of life's experiences, including the cruelties and suffering, is, I don't know, it's just part of it, man. You can't escape it. And I feel like there has to be a sense of perspective. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. What I'm saying is, Siddartha, because of who he is, can get to this state. Govinda eventually can sort of experience it because he is searching for something. Even though Siddhartha sort of shits on the idea of looking, like, I still think it's necessary. Because there's a lot of people in the world that I don't think really think about these things. Or if they do, it's very fleeting. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, do you think that, assuming that this is a thing that is good, do you think that what Siddhartha goes through is a positive thing? Do you put a value judgment on it?
In terms of his attaining enlightenment?
I don't want to say enlightenment, because enlightenment is attached too much to Buddhism, and there's a certain rejection of Buddhist thinking in this, because it's... Siddhartha's, I guess, if you want to call it enlightenment, is much more grounded in reality, at least in terms of accepting the world, in a way that a lot of Buddhism rejects. But yeah, do you?
It's like a materialist Buddhism.
Sure. Well, I think, and Hesse sort of talked about this, and people that write about this book in particular talk about it as Hesse sort of trying to meld like Eastern and Western thought. And he wrote an introduction to a Japanese edition of this book in which he said that directly. He said, like, eventually we won't view these two things, two schools of philosophy as opposing, because the great ideas in both of them are sort of getting at something similar. Yeah. But yeah, do you view where Siddhartha is at the end of this book as a good place to be? A good view of the world?
I mean, I guess personally.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I think that is what... I'm going to go ahead and make everybody upset. That is what we mean rightly when we say enlightenment, or we mean rightly when we say salvation. Okay. And in... Spinoza, I'm into Spinoza these days. That is what Spinoza means by a state of blessedness. And I think there's it's like that's the top of the spiritual pyramid when you have equanimity for everything.
And do you think it's possible for everyone to get there, or anyone to get there?
No. Well, that's funny. I was just having this conversation yesterday. I don't know. I think it's possible. I mean, why not? But I think for most people, it's not going to happen. I think that's why we've built around these ideas an idea of, in Buddhism or Hinduism, rebirth. Chances are you're not going to achieve it in this life, and don't feel too bad about that. You'll come back and you'll get another chance. And in Christianity, we have the idea of grace, that you're not going to attain salvation. In fact, only one human being did, but don't worry about it. Make a good effort. At the end of your life, God will build the bridge, which is grace, that will get you the rest of the way there.
And do you think, sorry, this just popped in my head, kind of a random, do you think that's why a lot of Christians have missionaries and proselytizing? More so than people that believe in rebirth, because they believe this is their one life to get it right? Do you think it's their duty to like go out and save people because they believe, I mean, obviously they believe in what they're doing is correct, and they want other people to share in this vision? I mean, this is a sort of idealized version of what that is, but
I mean, I suppose to some degree, I wonder if you could turn it around and say, for spiritual practices that believe in rebirth, if that concept wasn't there, would they be more interested in speeding up other people's progress?
Yeah.
Because in the time span of eternity, what is now? What's 100 years? Nothing. But if that 60, 70, 80 years is all that time that person has, and if they don't, well, we could get
the reason I asked is just because I mean, you lived here as well, and I'm in Korea, where there's this strange commingling of Buddhism and very intense Christianity. Korea is a very Christian nation, and there's a lot of missionaries and a lot of proselytizing, a lot of people trying to save each other, and you don't see that with the Buddhists here. Yeah. Anyway, random thought. Sorry.
But I mean, I am in my own spiritual ideas very much of a synergist.
I don't know what that means.
Let's say a Unitarian. I mean, I think that at the base of all of these thoughts, somebody had an experience. Somebody, sometime, sat by the river, had an experience of salvation, blessedness, enlightenment, whatever. They had an aha, and they wanted to share that. They wanted to share that because it alleviated from them their feelings of anxiety, stress, meaninglessness, pain, whatever. And they want to share that. And how do we share things as human beings? With language. And so that got translated and shared in books and sermons and whatever. But I believe that at the base of it, generally, let's say, is a true experience that is very similar. And I think if you look at the mystical experiences of different religions, they're a lot more similar than the dogma would have you believe.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
I think I appreciate this book a lot more because it oddly mirrors some of my own progression of not trusting dogma and abandoning certain faiths and then going out into the world and experiencing it and having somewhat mystical experiences. I mean, one of the greatest ones I had was also on a river. Granted, it was with the aid of psilocybin, but still a mystical experience nonetheless.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything artificial about that.
I feel like you're being sarcastic.
No, I'm 100% genuine.
Oh, okay. Why? Why is it not artificial?
I don't think it's any more artificial than any experience. Like it is, if you were to, practice asceticism or fasting or prayer or meditation, I think the point is to take your mind to a certain state of being, to separate it. And Hesse actually talks about this. I mean, Hesse, I think in this book, and also... I mean,
in Steppenwolf, there's...
Yeah. Well, when he abandons asceticism in Siddartha, when Siddhartha abandons asceticism, he talks about how what they're trying to achieve with asceticism, the common people are already achieving with alcohol.
Yeah.
Like that is the same thing, that you're trying to create space between your mind and your body. So I think that psilocybin or LSD or ayahuasca are also tools for that, to have an experience like that. I don't think that they don't deliver that experience for you.
No. I mean, there's plenty of people that have imbibed various substances and had no experience but something negative, maybe something closer to hell than a mystical or spiritual experience. Does it matter whether that is achieved with the aid of something like that, or maybe down in the future through VR or something? Do you think there's a diminishing or something not as genuine about it as like doing that or achieving that on your own? Or is it the same thing as like staring at a river? Like the river still provides that experience for you.
I suppose there's a question of what is real. And I think we could say easily, simply, I don't think anybody would argue with you if you said a river is real. Some people might take issue if we said the mind is real. But I think that we can mostly agree that a digital environment is manufactured. So I don't know. I guess I'm skeptical of an idea that we could recreate a union with the ground of reality. I think that is what is being attempted, that you could discover a union with the ground of reality through a human constructed environment, that what you would find at the end of that, unless, it's like language. You're not going to find the ground of reality through language. And a magnificent architecture could have been created by a mystical architect, and certainly architecture can help elevate your mind, but that's only to the degree that the architect is capable of, I think.
Well, and the mind that's viewing it.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I read this line or this poem by Mary Oliver the other day, and I don't remember the poem. The poem's about how a poem doesn't have to be about anything magnificent. It can be about a very simple thing. A poem opens up a space for something else to happen. And that's what you mean by the mind viewing it. I think that if you're in the right state of mind, maybe it can be a sort of portal.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, we kind of got off topic of the book itself a little bit. I don't know about you, but the book left me wanting to experience that sensation more. Mm-hmm. But also part of me, and maybe I kind of wish Nick had read this because he's much more of a rationalist and materialist. I wonder if he would hate this book, actually. But there is a part of me in this that like finds it trite and empty still. There's like this little part of me that resists that idea, that wants to fight against any sort of sincerity or spiritual feeling. There's still a void.
It's funny that you say that, because ostensibly this is a novel. And do you think that does it have merit as a novel itself without the spiritual message? It's not really a moral in a traditional sense, I don't think, but
no, it's very, like you said, it's not. Siddhartha has an opinion, but his opinion eventually is more a very like it's not confrontational or judgmental or moralistic per se, but it definitely has a message, I think, that it's trying to get across. But yeah, as a novel, it's hard to say, because now we got to get into like, what's the point of a novel? Mm-hmm. Like, do you read novels just to be entertained, to have like a good story? In your head, what does a good novel do?
Well, I guess it is a sort of balancing act. Like, if it's all sentiment, that's not likely to be a good novel. If it's all style, it's not likely to be a good novel. And if it's all content, if it's all plot, it's probably not likely to be a good novel.
Yeah.
And if it's all substance, which I would say is what he's trying to do, is like cut everything out except the substance of the story. It's not even the story. The substance of the concept, substance of life.
Yeah.
Is it a good novel? Or is it, does it become something else? Does it become something more maybe religious or fabulistic? Because I think that it generally, I would say that it has to have all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting seeing how novelists dial those dials up and down to keep you engaged with, a piece of writing.
Yeah. And we've seen that done successfully and unsuccessfully. I think of the two big books that we read, East of Eden, War and Peace. You see how the author will literally just shift voices and shift focus to turn one of those knobs up higher than the other. And I think Tolstoy does it better than Steinbeck does in East of Eden, in terms of balancing the ideas and the messages in the narrative, and then also separating them and having these little miniature essays. And this book definitely blends that into one thing. This feels very much like part of a fable that you would hear in a like you mentioned, Unitarianism, like a Unitarian sermon almost. Mm-hmm. Like a really long story about this man, in order to sort of leave you thinking about these ideas. Whether or not it's a good novel, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it's a very good novel, actually.
That's kind of my feeling. It's like it's good at something else.
Yes, I agree.
It's very different, I think, from Hesse's other books too. I've read a decent chunk of his work, and this is like the least lyrical, I think, of all of his.
Yeah. And in his other books, there's certainly more involvement in character, in decision making, in storyline. This feels just very, very straightforward. So yeah, I don't think it's a very successful novel, but it's still successful at something. What that is? What is this?
I mean, maybe it's successful at philosophy. Okay,
so what is the philosophy then? I mean, we've kind of more or less talked about it, but what would you call this?
I think it's a philosophy of egoism, that the only path to truth is through your own mind, and that the workings of your own mind are mysterious to you, and nonetheless, that's your only option.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I think there's a sort of metaphysic to it also, which is that existence is good. Existence, the right existence is loving. And that by listening to that voice of yourself in your mind, you will come to a right relationship with existence.
Okay. And that voice is sort of the only thing that's necessary, as it says, but you really also need to experience life itself. You can't run away from it in order to learn from it.
Right.
But I keep coming back to like, is that an actual real thing can anyone do that? And what if the voice in your head says, I want to hurt people, or I want to do, I feel like there's bad people in the world. There's bad things. Does everyone have this good voice in them? This voice that tells them what is right?
Well, he doesn't quite go there when Siddhartha has that period of hedonism in his life. He's still a pretty good person. Like, he's still good to people. He's nice to people.
Well, there is a point when he becomes addicted to gambling that he sort of becomes an asshole. But you're right, not totally. I mean, he doesn't help people as much, and he's not as giving and open to listening.
I guess you're right.
Yeah.
So there's a line in Spinoza's Ethics in which he's trying to describe what good and bad mean. And he describes, I don't think I'm going to use his terms correctly, but good is, he says, we consider the good to be that which leads you to, as anything that leads you towards I don't know what term he uses at this instance, but that leads you towards a greater state of being, a higher state of being, that is good. And the interesting thing about saying something like that is you don't know what that is.
No.
It's not, if you break your leg, that doesn't seem good. That seems bad. But if when you broke your leg and you got a chance to, read the Ethics of Spinoza or the Bible or whatever, and it reveals some, being taken out of whatever pattern of behavior you had, taking out of that for a minute, maybe it is good. Maybe at the end of it, you can say, hey, that was good. And that's the only thing that defines, or that we can say defines good and bad. So, I think your question, does everybody have this voice in their head, or do some people just want to do bad things? I think the real challenging thing about what Hesse is saying, I think what Tolstoy is saying, is that we don't know. It's not for us to decide. If somebody goes out and does a bunch of bad things, that seems bad, but we don't know that it's bad. It just is. But
do you actually believe that? Is what I'm asking you.
Yeah, I don't know yet.
Okay.
I mean, intellectually I get it, and I think I believe that it is extremely difficult to definitively determine whether something that someone else did is good or bad. Because I'm not in their head. I think I know that for myself to a degree, because when I'm honest with myself, I can get a sense of it. But even then, it's like, you may think it's good, and then a few years later, you're like, maybe that wasn't so good. So it's hard to say. And so the question really is, what are you going to do about it? And I guess in that regard, I'm more in the camp of Hesse, which says that you do know, everybody does know, barring psychosis. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But that you do know, what you need to do is learn how to listen. And I'm more in that camp than in follow the rules. It's already been figured out, which I think actually backfires a lot and teaches people to ignore that voice.
Yeah.
And then they don't have an internal compass. Even if they look like they're doing good, they don't have an internal compass anymore.
Well, I think that goes to the point of something you hear a lot, especially with people raising children, is that especially when people get to those teenage years, like we talked about, where you look at the world in somewhat contemptuously, at least, this idea of like everyone goes through this stage of rebellion. And that's a lot of Hesse's books are really about, I think, people going through some stage of rebellion against what is expected or what they've been told to do in some way. Siddartha including, I think. Even though he, especially in the beginning, he rejects his father to go and live the ascetic life. But then, after a few years, he realizes that they have nothing really to teach him. But he has learned something. But yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you that voice is there. And one thing that I'm sort of wrestling with now is why. But yeah, that to me is the question that I'm wrestling with recently, is why does that exist? Is it just an occurrence and a phenomenon, an accidental thing? I don't know. And also, like, where do we get any sense of good or bad or moral justification? Where does that come from? Because I have those feelings in me, like, oh, I know within myself this is good, this is bad. Or bigger scale world events, you have a sense this is right, this is wrong. But why? In a general sense, I think there's a sort of simple one, like, I know that most, and again, this is most pain and most suffering is wrong. Sometimes it's beneficial and you learn from it. So I don't want anyone to go through that. So there's like that feeling. But again, I don't particularly know why I feel that way. And I know for a lot of religious people, it's the word of God. God instills us with this sense of morality. But I don't have any strong feeling.
You know, it's funny. I know you just adopted a dog. I adopted a cat a year and a half ago or so. And I feel like watching the cat, who I think, she's pretty smart, but maybe intellectually inferior to me.
Maybe.
Seeing... I don't know what she's thinking. We haven't been able to communicate that well.
Okay.
But seeing this little creature, like, I can see the stress. I can see when she's conflicted. I can see when she wants something, but chooses not to do that, or when she does something wrong. And there's all of these kind of maybe simpler versions of these thoughts going on in her head. And I can see that, like, some cats, some animals work up like they end up in rough shape in their minds. They've been lied to by people. Maybe one day their owner's nice, one day their owner's mean, and they don't know what's real anymore. And so there's an inherent, and I think that manifests, like they start acting neurotic. They're not in good health. It manifests in their bodies. So there's like an inbuilt or built-in. It's like natural. There's a built-in nature of what it means to thrive as a creature like that.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true of people.
Yeah.
And that has to do with all of this stuff. I think it just seems complicated.
You think it's just merely an evolutionary trait that we do things so that we can continue as a species?
Yeah, and maybe so.
Okay.
Maybe it's like, I don't know that entirely answers the question why but that there's a natural state that, I think of it like tuning a guitar string. Like I guess that's somewhat cultural, but that there's a state of being that is in tune and there's a state of being that's not in tune. And we apply ideas like morality and God and heaven and hell and whatever to these ideas. But if you're listening to yourself, then you can learn to tell whether you're in tune or not. Even if it feels good to be angry in the moment, that can quickly become an out of tune kind of character.
Okay. And do you think it's possible to lose the voice completely?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like a dog or a cat can't find its way back,
or the voice alters and becomes something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's generally true.
Yeah. It's fun. Did you read this book in high school or in school?
Not for school.
I mean, did you read it as coursework?
No, it wasn't for course. It was, I think a teacher recommended it, or my father owned a copy or something. I just remember reading it in the high school library when I was, I don't know, like 16 or 17, something like that.
I was just curious because I know that people do read it as coursework. And I'm like, where does this fall? Do you read this?
Yeah.
Where would you read this book?
I have no idea.
Philosophy, I think. I don't know where else you'd read it.
Yeah, because
it's not religion. It's not English.
Yeah, I mean, it touches on religion, but I don't think it's religious. It's got to be philosophy. And as literature, I don't think it's not a very good book to teach like in a literature course unless you're teaching like philosophical literature. But again, most of those books that I read that were similar, you mentioned the one that you read a while ago called like Ishmael or something.
Oh, yeah.
There's like these philosophical novels that are not really novels. I remember there was another one that was really popular a long time ago called The Alchemist or something.
I was going to bring up The Alchemist, yeah. I was just going to say I think the comparison is almost inevitable between this and The Alchemist.
I remember trying to read it a long time ago and not liking it, but I don't remember it at all. But I know there's quite a few of these kind of books around. They use storytelling to pass along some philosophical message.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, an old question of substance.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like all substance.
Yeah, it really is.
If it was books of some style, maybe this wouldn't make the cut. I happen to think that there's a lot of good wisdom in this book, and it's immensely readable.
It took me a day. I read it.
Yeah. What about you? Substance?
Yeah, that's what it is. It is of substance. I think a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people. I feel like this is a love or hate book, maybe.
Yeah. I was looking at Goodreads reviews, and I was like, oh man, there's some people who really don't like this book.
Yeah, I bet. I can see that, because there's a part of me that wanted to hate it, but I didn't. Like, it's still there. This rejection of anything vaguely spiritual, I find somewhat annoying. Still, I can't help it. I don't know why. It's the inner voice that tells me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very reflective. This book is going to make you, or at least it made me, especially at this stage, not so much when I was younger. It really made me think a lot about how I view the world and how I think about myself.
Same. I mean, I think, I think it's interesting to read this book in middle age, which is more or less where we are. I don't feel like this is a book that people often read in middle age. You read it as a youth. But to read it at this stage in life and think like, have I forgotten? Have I gotten lost in this Maya that I entered for some reason? Have I let go of some path or some truth that I was seeking as a young man?
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I certainly felt that. I don't know, this book sort of like wiped away a layer of grime.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate it on that level quite a bit. Whether or not I feel that there's a lot of truth in his vision of the world at the end, I don't necessarily know. But the idea that you have to listen to yourself, not ignore that voice that we keep talking about, I think is really, to me, the most important aspect of the book. I don't know. I feel like if I were teaching high school, I would not assign this to high school kids.
Really? It's funny because I also want everybody I know to read it.
Me too. But I feel like
could you just do me a favor? Just spend an afternoon and read Siddartha. I think you'd understand a little bit about, well, not just me, but like yourself too.
Anyone over the age of 35 who's lived a little might want to read this book. If you're in the middle of coming home from work and kind of hating your job and thinking about the list of things you have to buy at the grocery store, just take a day, read this book, think about it.
And let us know what you think.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us at booksofsomesubstance.com and on Instagram and Twitter with the handle booksosubstance. And as always, if you can, click some buttons on the internet for reviews and likes and all that good stuff. Every little bit helps. Until next time, happy reading.
Yeah, Siddhartha. It's Siddhartha. That's weird. I've been saying Siddartha the whole time.
I'm gonna take a page out of Siddhartha's book, and I'm gonna follow myself on this one and just say Siddartha. You know, fuck teachers.
Yeah, you can't learn anything.
Can't learn from
I'm gonna
listen to the river of my mind that says Siddartha.